You most likely know the situations where someone attacks you or where you have to attack someone, even politely. You might disagree on a project, on an approach, on an idea. And you all know that facts are not the only aspect of the solution and of the situation. When people decide at the end who is going to win the trust, who is going to get the budget, who is going to be the next leader, who's going to get the new project team, who is going to implement the next step in your organization, or who is going to win the next pitch at your football club to lead the team. No matter if it's private or business, rhetorical situation, rhetorical skills are extremely important when it comes to getting your point across. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Rhetorical skills for leaders in critical situations. We just recently had a very critical situation in the UK. And if you are from the UK, you most likely know what I'm referring to. We had Prime Minister's question time after it came to public, and you heard that most likely that Boris Johnson and a couple of the people who work for him or his government or for the public service had the amazing idea of partying during lockdown while we all stayed at home. That didn't go down too well. More than 100 fines were issued, and now the Sue Gray report was issued, and the Sue Gray report just offered damning evidence. And then, of course, anyone was looking at PMQ, Prime Minister's Question Time, for our international listeners. Prime Minister's Question Time means that they all sit together in the parliament. Then you can ask the Prime Minister a question and the Prime Minister must answer. There's no chance that the Prime Minister can say, I'm not going to say anything here. Sometimes they try to get away a bit, but it's very important to have excellent rhetorical skills. And as we saw just last week, Boris Johnson once more got away with it. And I want to make very sure right now, this podcast today is not about politics. I am, as a self-employed entrepreneur on the liberal spectrum, which is not too surprising, I think, for many people who are listening here. And when you're listening for longer, I always openly admit that so that you can see any bias that might occur, which I openly address. So it's very important that we're not talking about politics, but about the rhetorical skills here. It is shocking to see, and I'm talking to you in my second language here, how weak the rhetorical skills of Labour MPs, how weak these skills are developed. Almost like people think it is irrelevant and it's just enough when you're factually on the right side. Of course, it's important to have a clue what you're doing. Science leads the way. And when you follow me anywhere on social media or anywhere on any business platform, you see that everything I do is based in science. However, when I see certain approaches, and I'm just going to give you 3 examples of how appalling these rhetorical skills were, Labour MPs tried to call out Boris Johnson. That's, of course, their job. You want to have one of these major hits that end up in the newspapers, online and offline, that people have it on their mind and see Boris Johnson fail in Parliament, so you get an advantage out of the discussion. And that did not happen for the opposition. Just to give you 3 examples. One Labour MP stood up and was talking about Boris Johnson's, and I quote, half-assed apologies. You don't have to be a master speaker to know that this choice of words, the ASS word, simply does not belong to the House of Commons or the Parliament. When you think this is real talk or this is how it should be, there are many ways to express a concern. But when you use words which are normally used by non-professional people, people will consider you one of them, a non-professional person. Or when you try, and that's example number 2, when you try to call Boris Johnson out and you ask him, when you look back in history, what are you going to look down at? What are you going to look to? Are you looking at parties or how you let down the people? And this didn't go down well because there's a major mistake. When you try to make a list, never make it a list of 2. And we're going to go there in a minute how to do it better. One MP spoke very emotionally about the situation with his grandfather, why he couldn't visit a funeral. Deeply touching. However, way too long, the Speaker of the House had to interrupt him and say, you have to make it a question. What is your point here? And when you are interrupted by the Speaker, your whole point already is gone. Leaders today with weak rhetoric skills are not tenable in any position in the organization. And I know this doesn't go down well with everyone because some people say, well, I'm hired to be an expert, not a great speaker. And I fully support your idea behind that, but we have to see where is the reality in an organizational setting, especially in a very competitive market today. When you are a great expert, but you cannot get your point across publicly, you cannot be a leader today. And by the way, I'm talking to you now in my second language, and I learned all this because obviously I didn't grow up speaking English in Germany, obviously. So don't tell me you cannot learn it or come along with apologies or excuses where you say, I can't do it because, and then you tell me why you cannot be a great speaker. There's always a chance, as long as you do not have any kind of restrictions where you simply, for example, cannot use certain words, or there's a law in place where you're not allowed to talk to, or of course, there might be disabilities that when you're not an able-bodied person, then of course there might be certain aspects where you simply say, I cannot speak. That is a physical aspect. And I, of course, say then we have to deal with it in a different manner. However, for most people, this skill can be learned. And now we are going to look into how to do it better. So first, when you want to do it better and you want to land a big hit, because we're looking at both situations, either you want to attack someone, getting a point across, or you have to defend yourself because you're a bit on the back of your feet and you say, it's getting close. How can I get away with it? Very important is all the techniques I show you now can be misused for manipulation, and I distance myself from anyone doing so. When you have done something wrong, you do the following. Step one, you apologize. Step two, you say what the countermeasures are and implement these countermeasures, and then you do better in the future. Anyone can make mistakes, then you pay your dues, and then we move on from there. That is how a democracy works. With serious crimes, of course, there's a court trial, and that's a completely different matter. However, when you've done something wrong, address the issue, apologize, say what the countermeasures are, implement them, and then move on from there, showing a better behavior in the future. So how to do it better now? Step number one, when you use the facts, you're on a very good way. However, facts alone do not convince people. And we see many aspects during elections, during organizational meetings, in public or private life, where facts do not win because emotions are very strong. So when you are factually a perfect expert, always look at what is the emotion behind it that you have to add. And by the way, always use professional language. When you say that you want to get a point across, but you are unable to do it with professional language, it simply means that you try to tell people what they should do, but at the same time they think you sound a bit like that guy or that person in the bar that had one beer too much. And of course, no one wants to talk to these people. It is now very important that you do not give them a rhetorical capitulation, that you do not surrender your skills. When you think that terms like half-assed apologies, or you try to swear at people or yell at them, if you go away from being a professional with rhetorical skills, no one is going to listen to you. And by the way, we still have people around in the keynote industry or the speaking industry, however you want to call that, and they say, oh, sometimes you have to use swear words to make a point. No, you don't. When you use swear words, it simply means your rhetorical skills are too limited to get it across in a proper manner. And then you're not a professional. And of course, in organizations, when you're not a professional, no one is going to trust you. And sometimes, of course, other aspects add to that as well. So first they use a swear word, then they go full throttle on toxic masculinity. Then it's all about themselves, their story, their love, how amazing they are. It's nothing else than self-portrayal or an ego show on a stage. That, of course, does not help anyone. You think you were amazing, while at the same time, you didn't convince anyone in the audience. So it's never about you. Just remember that. It is never about you. So when you want to talk about apologies, use professional languages. When you want to make a list, let's get back to the example I mentioned before. And what are you going to look back when you look back in history, Mr. Johnson? Is it the parties or how you let down the people? Never use a list of two. It's always a list of three, especially when you are in a culture where humor goes down well or you want to make a point. So, for example, when you have, and it's called the rule of three, the rule of three means the third aspect is the important one, either the important one or the funny one. When you say, we have bad weather, we have inflation, we have I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, then the third one is the funny one. If you use only two, when you say we have inflation and we have I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, people will say that doesn't have anything to do with each other. When you use four or even more, when you say we have bad weather, we have bad food, we have inflation, we have I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, then they would say that's just rambling. So it's very important that you are master of the rule of three. It's always ding, ding, doing. And the doing, the third one is the most important aspect, or the one that's really funny when you are able to use humor. By the way, be careful with humor because sometimes you make jokes that are not appropriate, probably not anymore or not at all. When you use emotions, and that is what we had with the other MP, the other Labour MP that said I couldn't visit my grandfather's funeral. They're very touching and very sad indeed. When you use emotions, the emotions always have to make a point. So use the emotion, but then make the point. Tell people what it's about and then ask your questions, because that is very important. If you're unable to do so, people think you're wallowing, or you're just talking because you don't know what you really want to say. And then you are what people in the English language often refer to as you are a bit all over the place, meaning you didn't make a point. And very important now is when you are on the other side of the game, so someone attacks you and you now have to react on it, there are three main techniques that you should use to be in a better position. So step number one is always give positive feedback. No matter what they ask you, you always say something like, excellent question, that's a very important point. Thank you very much for pointing to that matter. So you always give positive feedback, because no one can say anything against positive feedback. When you tell them, oh, what a stupid question is that, could you please stick to the point? That's utter nonsense. Then, of course, people have another reason to attack you, because they will call you ignorant. So when you give people positive feedback, there's no way they can say anything against that. The second aspect is you can use the so-called bridging technique. The bridging technique is when someone wants to point to a certain aspect, you don't want to bring up that aspect because you have a different idea of how to solve it, and you want to bring up your point, but you don't know how to do it properly without looking a bit or portraying the picture of being a bit self-promotional. So how to do that? I just give you an example. When someone says, Mr. Johnson, we have an issue. We have inflation. Prices go up and up and up. People go to Tesco or Sainsbury's or Waitrose, depending on where they live and what their income situation is, and they are paying more and more for food, basic necessities. They have less and less money in their pockets. How do you want to solve the situation? People have less and less income available for their life. And then, of course, you want to probably do not point to regulation when you're conservative, or you do not want to say we have to set a certain price which they cannot go over or lower, because you don't want to have that market regulation. So what to say? So now you can use the bridging technique, which can go the following. You say, excellent point. I fully agree with you. We need people with more net income in their pockets. People need more income from the work they do. How do we do that? At the moment, we have very high taxation, very high deductions. People need more net income, especially today. And that is why we need to lower the deductions on their income. And only the Conservative Party is the one that promised the people to lower the deductions on their income. We made people have more money in their pockets, while Labour was in there for raising taxes. And then you are there, you brought your own point across. You want deductions lowered, while the other party probably wants to raise deductions. Bridging technique always has three steps. Step number one, you say, excellent point, very important. Step number two is you say something like, what people really care about is, and then you say, for example, a higher net income. And then step number three is you point out to your measures how you want to do that. It's very important that this bridging technique is something that sounds very easy when you listen to it right now, but it's quite complicated and quite complex as well when you try to use it in public. So it needs a lot of practice. You should have a coach or professional training for that. And by the way, when you have emotions, always appreciate emotions. And that is something that Boris Johnson did very well. When the MP spoke about emotions, and then the Speaker of the House of Commons had to cut the person off and say, could you please get to the point? What's your question? You have to make a point with asking a question. Boris Johnson then said, after the question was made, but of course, when you get cut off by the Speaker of the House of Commons, your point is already gone. Boris Johnson said, thank you very much for speaking up. I fully agree that this man should have the chance to speak about his emotions, because in his situation, I'm very sad about what happened and I apologize. These emotions need to be addressed exactly here. So when you appreciate emotions, you always win the hearts of the people, even when they actually have something against you and they do not like you. Very important is never talk down on emotions because you think they are irrelevant. always appreciate emotions, except when someone practices hate speech, because you never appreciate hate speech. But that's blindingly obvious. You don't need an expert for that to tell you. There's one very general principle. When you are very good with your rhetorical skills, you're able to win situations that you cannot win. And Boris Johnson did exactly that. Looking at the following days, he made a whole sequence of rhetorical, highly skilled steps. Boris Johnson, we are talking with, and that I do not support Boris Johnson in the slides with anything. Boris Johnson is a highly skilled orator, debater, speaker, name it as you want, from Oxford University, where for years and years they train your rhetorical skills because they know how important it is. So the next day, Boris Johnson announced the windfall tax, an additional tax on electricity companies, only then the next day to say that he changes the ministerial code about people having to step down when they lie in parliament. He says, of course, not we're going to abolish that, but he says it doesn't make any sense that any minor, probably incorrect statement that could have been done involuntarily or based on wrong information available to you, that this is the reason that you have to step down. So he changes the ministerial code while at the same time he blocks his own ethics advisor to investigate him. And at the end, he got away with it all. So it is important that you see with rhetorical skills, you can win situations that seem impossible to win. To now wrap this up, there was one very important moment where Labour MP and Labour leader Keir Starmer could have landed a big hit. However, he messed it up rhetorically, which surprised me. He's a professional barrister, so he should know better. However, often when people are very good when it comes to expertise, they think that rhetorics have to take the backseat, and they never should. Keir Starmer made an excellent phrase. He said, you cannot be at the same time a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. That is what we call a phrase that pays. The phrase that pays is what you find as a headline in the newspaper. That is what people remember. That is what people talk about. That is what people will bring in your organization, forward to others. That is going to be a slogan or marketing claim. That is simply a phrase which anyone remembers. You cannot be at the same time a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. However, in a speech, this only works when then you make a full stop and you stop talking. Because what happens is, and I show it to you right now, imagine I'm in the House of Commons saying, Mr. Johnson, you cannot be at the same time a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. And in this silence, you will hear applause. People say, yeah, here, etc., etc., etc. And then you gain support. The media will pick it up and you have all the headlines you want. However, when you have this great phrase and then just ramble on, as Keir Starmer unfortunately did, people did not have the chance to give applause. You do not have the media that picks it up, and the whole aspect of what you just want to get across just gets lost. You must be able to make a full stop. Then there is a moment of silence. I know how hard this can be. A second can feel like a minute or even longer. And after the silence, you hear the applause, and you must be able to stand through that time. Of course, there's more about that in the expert letter, which will soon be renamed to the leadership letter. When you go to expert.nb-networks.com, you can sign up right there, and you will receive a weekly email every Wednesday morning with all the free resources which I published. And of course, it's 100% content at free guarantee. When, of course, now you say, well, I actually have a situation right now in a really complex project. Could you help me with that? Or can I just ask you a question? Of course, just drop me an email. nb@nb-networks.com. Of course, when you now say, hey, I need very specific help, could you just go through my presentation? Or you say, we need someone for training, speaking, coaching, consulting, mentoring, or project interim management. Or you even need someone to host your event as an MC, host, moderator. Happy to do so. But if you say, hey, can we just have a chat? Yes, drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com, and we take it from there. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Very important now is that you apply what you heard in this podcast today, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the change, the hopefully positive change in your organization that you want to see. Because especially when it comes to rhetorics, it's all about the application and getting the real world practice out there to become better and better every day. Always happy to help you and wishing you all the best applying these skills in your daily business. And for this week, there's only one thing left to say for me. Thank you very much for your time.